Welcome to Part C. Then, in 1993, Commodore would be back again with a new version of their machine called the Amiga 1200. This was a greatly improved machine over the standard Amiga. It had its own new graphics chipset called AGA, which meant better graphics and much more colours, and 2 megabytes of RAM as standard in the machine. It also offered the option to buy a hard drive, although an 80 megabyte hard drive would add an extra cool £150 to the $299 standard price. 2 game bundles would be released for the machine. There was the Race and Chase pack, which was also known as the Fast and Furious bundle. The pack came with only 2 games, but they were really quite good fun. There was Nigel Mansell's World Champion, a great Formula 1 arcade racer that looked good and was great fun to play, even if it didn't have great simulation like Formula 1's by Microprose. Then there was Trolls by Flare, which was a multi-coloured extravaganza platformer based on those weird troll dolls that my sister used to have. The game was good fun, if nothing special, although you can sometimes feel in serious colour overload as you stare at the multicolour display in the game. For an extra £50, however, you could get the alternate bundle called Dynamite Desktop, which gave you the brilliant Deluxe Paint 4 paint package and Wordsworth 2, a word processor. The pack also had 2 games. There was Dennis, which was a film tie-in to that terrible film of the same name, which was the American version of Dennis the Menace starring Walter Matthau. Let's just say the less said about the game, the better. Also, there was Oscar by Flare, which was basically the Trolls game engine, but this time with a K character called Oscar, and with the levels all being themed around the movies, with each level based around a film genre. Actually, I quite like this game. It's not going to win awards, but there is something quite charming about the game. Sadly, J. Miner, who had suffered from kidney problems most of his later life, would die on June the 20th in 1994, aged 62, and the computing world would miss out on one of the great geniuses of the video game industry. Jay, as one of the founding fathers, you will be sorely missed. Of course, there were other machines released, with the business range including the A1500, the A2000, the A3000 and the A4000. The A4000 in particular was very impressive as it was used in the TV industry to produce special effects in TV shows such as Babylon 5. Also, there were the CD consoles that they released in Commodore. There was the CD-TV and the CD32 machines, each based on the A500 and A1200 machines respectively, but I promise you I'll cover these in more depth in a later episode. Well, that's the history lesson out the way, let's go straight on to all the classic games. The first company you need to look at when discussing the Amiga and Atari ST games would be the marvellous Cinemaware, as they really were the first company to design games which had the 16-bit home computers in mind, designing their games to have a film-like interactive experience. Set up in 1986 by husband and wife team Bob and Phyllis Jacob, they could see that with the new machines being released in 1985 and floppy disk storage, that games could now offer compelling narrative and film-like experience in the games. Things began being rather hectic, with an initial deal with Mindscape, meaning that they had to produce 4 games in 10 months, and they did it. These games as well were Defender of the Crown, Sinbad, SDI and King of Chicago, all still classed as classic games. But it was their first release, Defender of the Crown, that perhaps won the most gamers' hearts, with its medieval England setting and stacked full of enjoyable mini-games that advanced the story, from doing jousting to raiding castles. But it was the presentation and graphics by lead artist James D. Sachs that really wowed, and with nothing being seen before like it in the game. It was also this initial artwork that helped attract some great programmers to Cinemaware, such as John Cutter and a personal hero of mine, R.J. Mikal, who helped write the Amiga operating system and co-invented the Atari Lynx games console and 3DO games console. RJ Mikkel came on board to Cinemaware as he wanted to push the boundaries of video games. Actually, it was Mikkel who coded Defender of the Crown, as the original programmers who had worked on the title weren't doing a good enough job and had to be fired. Now, Bob Jacobs needed someone to write the game essentially from scratch in only 10 weeks. Mikkel said he could do the job and was true to his word, although he was so shattered by the end of it, as he only posted the game under the door, being too tired to meet face to face. But Cinemaware wasn't just about one game, it was about a multitude array of classic games being released, before sadly shutting their doors in 1991 due to rampant piracy and the recession at the time. I would love to cover them all, but I'm afraid we don't have the space to discuss all of them, and so I'm only going to concentrate on two of my favourites. First, there was It Came From the Desert by Randy Platt, and released in 1989. This time the game took its inspiration from the classic science fiction B-movies of the 1950s, and most notably the film Them. In the game you play Bradley, a geologist, who starts to investigate a strange meteor fall that occurs over his Dust Bowl town of Lizard Breath. As the game progressed, it would quickly transpire that this meteor had mutated the ants to giant proportions, leaving you only a short time to find their nest and destroy their queen before the town, and possibly the world, is overrun. Typical of Cinemaware games, this had you take part in a number of mini-games ranging from flying planes to flick knife fighting in the outdoor cinema. To be honest, many of the mini-games were quite frustrating, but it was a compelling backstory to the game, and the mad array of David Lynch-style village inhabitants that would keep you coming back for more. Of course, the great 1950s setting and stunning graphics and music in the game helped obviously as well. But there was also a lesser-known sequel to It Came From the Desert called Antheads. This was actually an expansion pack to the original game, set 5 years after the original. This time the town's inhabitants were mutating into ant people due to atomic experiments. It is also the first time that a game actually genuinely scared me, especially when you saw the first person you were talking to actually mutate into an ant in front of you. The game was a worthy successor to the original, being only released via mail order in the US, so a lot of people missed out this game the first time around. Thankfully, the game ROM, along with the entire Cinemaware back catalogue, is available for free on cinemaware.com website, so check this out, as it's a great way to relive these classic games. Interestingly, Bob Jacob would often appear as a cameo bit part in his games as a character, kind of like Alfred Hitchcock did in his films. There would also be cameo roles of other gaming staffs, so it's well worth replaying these games to see if you can spot their cameo appearances. The second Cinemaware game I'm going to mention is Wings, released in 1990, and really this is Cinemaware's last proper release before they closed their doors. This time you played a World War I pilot who must fly in dogfights and bombing raids to become top pilot in the leaderboard. This was a great game, giving a great sense of being there and experiencing what it was like to be a pilot in the First World War. Over in Sierra, another classic adventure series had been cooked up by Al Lowe in the risque adventure game called Leisure Suit Larry in the Land of the Lounge Lizards, released in 1987. This took the Sierra text-only game called Soft Porn Adventure, released in 1981, as its inspiration. A game perhaps only notable today for having a naked Roberta Williams, co-founder of Sierra, in a bath. You can see her on the far right here. The adult antics of Leisure Suit Larry games and the adolescent humour was great fun, and a game which won many teenagers and big kids' hearts, as you helped the downtrodden loser, Larry Laffer, finally lose his virginity. 2 sequels would quickly follow, with Leisure Suit Larry Goes Looking for Love, in several wrong places, released in 1988, and Leisure Suit Larry 3, Passionate Patty, in the Pursuit of Pulsating Pectorals, which was released in 1989. In this game you also got to control Passionate Patty herself, as well as Larry. It was originally treated by Al that this would be the trilogy, wrapping things up nicely, with Larry having been given a job at Sierra at the end of the third game and starting to write the first game. However, popular demand would mean Larry would return, this time skipping part 4 and going straight into part 5, so Al could nicely sidestep. Leisure Suit Larry continued on to part 7 in 1996, before Outlaw would leave Sierra and leave the Leisure Suit Larry games behind. That's the end of part C. Please go on to part D.